Still with us? Welcome back. I hope you managed to grab a cup of tea or even a beer. Another session, this one brought to us together with our partners Capita today, and also the Boomtown Rats, it seems. I'm not sure who chose that one. So today's day, really, I mean, we're all sort of revolving around these questions of how do you capitalize, how do you make school a better experience as everyone goes back. But the question that we want to handle in this session is, what do we need to keep from the past year of remote schooling? It's been an extraordinary year of adaptation for all of us, whether you're working, parenting, caring, whatever you're doing. It's really been a time to think differently and adapt. And maybe we have enough time, a moment where we can actually pause for thought and think, well, what worked and what would we like to do more of? We've got again another brilliant panel for this session. We've got Professor Dame Alison Peacock, the Chief Executive of the Chartered College of Teaching, Lord Dr. Michael Hastings, who's Chancellor of Regent's University in London, but certainly by no means all, as many other spectrums in which he's worked and is working. Matt Hood, who's the founder and principal of the Oak National Academy, and Damian Riley, who's joined us from Capita, where he's Managing Director for Education Services. So lots of really direct experience of the classroom, direct experience of trying to make technology work in the classroom, and some tremendous achievements also in terms of just getting us all through pandemic. My colleague Phoebe's in the chat now. As ever, we want to hear from all of you, not only the experts who are joining us. And I think it's worth just thinking about how you got through this year. What were your coping strategies? What was your PE class like? How many biscuit breaks did you take during the course of the day? We can get to all of that in the chat, and let's see who ate the most hobnobs. But I think to start, it's worth just reminding ourselves, what's happened in this past year with millions of children taught at home and thousands of teachers turning to online lessons and parents trying to do their best. And I really wanted to start, if I could, with Matt Hood, because I think there's an argument for saying that with Matt, we've got the man who probably did more even than Joe Wicks to help us hold it all together in last year. Matt, I'm just going to, for those who don't know, the Oak National Academy, you set up from scratch free online classes from April last year. Just tell me, just to get us going, how many lessons did you make available, and how many times have they been used in the course of the last 15 or so months?
So on the site, as things currently stand, we've got over 10,000 lessons now. That's everything pretty much that a pupil in school might learn from the age, in formal education at least, from the age of about 4 up until 16, across about 20 different subjects, including a group of subjects that are covered in specialist settings, so special schools, alternative provision, pupil referral units. I didn't check the numbers before this call, which is my error, but we are well over now 130 million lessons over the period of our existence so far. We're just over a year old. At the peak during the most recent lockdown, we had about 2.5 million pupils a week doing lessons with us, and even now schools are back and reopen. About 40,000 teachers a day are still logging into the site and using the resources in a range of different ways, and some of those in class, but indeed the thing to, I think, remember is for lots of teachers and school leaders, the pandemic is not over. Pupils in Bolton are currently using the resources about twice the rate of the national average because of the rolling bubbles bursting and closures that are happening where the Delta variant is most out of control.
And I think it's worth saying, isn't it, that you did all that without the government. I'm dying to know how that came about, what the genesis of it was, and how long it took you to get from nowhere to literally everywhere.
So I wouldn't describe it as we did it without. In fact, I would describe it as we did it with everybody. There are very few people, I think, in my phone book or indeed the wider education profession who haven't, including Alison, who's on the call, who haven't contributed in some way, shape or form to this. This is not me by any stretch of the imagination. It is the widest, weirdest, wonderfulest group of people, hundreds of teachers and school leaders, trust chief executives, businesses. You know, we had a huge amount of pro bono support from Google, from KPMG, from Johnson Banks, from MUX, and a whole list of others. The amount of goodwill and freebies that we have been able to garner, candidly, in the efforts, the national effort to keep kids learning at home, has been extraordinary. My job is just the conductor. I just point smart people to other smart people who have conversations about things I often don't understand, and have made all of this magical resource happen.
It's pretty heartening to see that that good ideas can travel as well as bad ideas. I must say it's a pretty great lesson, and a beacon in a way for this year. And I think what one of the things, just to dwell on the granularity of it, because you know, not all of us will have had the benefit of an online calculus class, but from what I gather from my colleague Chris, who if he doesn't know everything, he certainly thinks he knows everything. I suppose the thing he was telling me was that that you have diagnostic tests sort of embedded in there, so teachers can sort of understand who's following along, who's doing well. I wonder if you just talk to that for a second.
Yeah, so each of our lessons is reasonably formulaic, actually. When you're creating 10,000 in 3 weeks, you need to have a bit of a template. But one of the things that we know from education is that asking, and this is something that Alison's an expert in, you should ask her more about it, but formative assessment, so that asking and responding to questions is a really, really powerful tool that teachers have at their disposal when it's used sensibly in a low stakes supportive way. So each of our lessons has 3 to 5 questions at the end that the pupils can answer. They can share those results back with their teachers, so that the teachers can understand what they understood and what they didn't understand. And you know, this is the magic of the platform. We're not here to do anything other than help teachers be great at what it is they already do. You know, we don't get in the way of the relationship between the teacher and the pupil. We're there to support the teacher, and you know, you can now ask those questions at a lesson level. You can also now ask them at a unit level as well. So if a teacher wants to know, you know, what do my pupils all know about, I don't know, glaciers, we have now been able to aggregate all of those questions, and so that they can, you know, do a slightly longer quizzing session with their pupils to find out what they know and what they don't know. And teachers are using the resources. Again, our wonderful profession is very creative. We just put these things out there, and teachers have come back with about 30 different other use cases for them that we didn't think of. Cover teaching, for anybody on the call who's a teacher, setting your cover lessons is a really grim task at 6 a.m. in the morning when you've got a banging headache. Setting an OAK lesson, sending a link to the poor teacher who's covering your lesson is a lot more straightforward. Teachers using them for CPD, teachers watching each other teach and getting ideas from that, and particularly for new and early career teachers is very interesting. All the way through to like lots of international use cases. We had an email in from a grandma in Beirut who was using the resources to educate her granddaughter whose school had been destroyed in the blast at the port that happened last year. So this is domestic and international, and we just get this constant flow of people coming and telling us that actually they've been really helpful in a whole range of different ways that we never thought of in the first place.
Well, I'm going to take your cue and bring in Alison, because it would be really wonderful just to get a teacher's eye view of this. And again, I've seen that dresser before in the background, but some people won't have done. If we were on Rate My Room, it's a clear 9.5, I think. Alison, just give us a feeling, like how has the profession responded to this as a resource?
So I think the profession has been amazing in all aspects. And when Matt and his kind of gang came together and started saying, we're going to do something really exciting here, loads and loads of us pitched in, because collaboration is at the heart of great teaching. Schools are like micro communities in themselves. And what happened when the pandemic struck was that it was really important that colleagues work together across the system, and they have done like never before. And so this model, the Oak National Academy, if you like, is an exemplification of what happens when we all come together to do something that is beneficial for all of us, but principally is beneficial for our children. This is what teachers really are driven by. They want to do things that make a difference for their children. They want to constantly seek to find a way through in very difficult circumstances. And there was a degree of brilliant camaraderie around this. And I think absolutely Matt is to be applauded for leading on it. I think some of us possibly at the beginning were a little bit suspicious that this was going to be a kind of formulaic way of grabbing hold of teaching and telling us how to do it. But the profession being what it is, we've gone with it, and it's not that at all. It's about providing learning in the most difficult and challenging circumstances, as Matt has provided, and providing really great opportunities for the school system to benefit from it. So well done, I would say. Great.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that I suppose one of the hazards, whether you're a pupil, a teacher, or a parent, in the last year has been the feeling of isolation. That somehow you're leading this abstract existence where it all seems to feel a little strange. It's really tremendously encouraging to hear you talking about collaboration, really, and across those difficult divides.
And in so many ways. So, the information that was coming out from government was often confusing, often contradictory, often changing at last minute. And teachers and leaders needed to learn from each other. So we had groups who set up meetings where they were meeting every week to just update each other on what was happening. And that partly that was about obviously sharing knowledge, but there was also something really important there, which was about giving each other courage. Because when you're in a school leadership position, whether you're a small school or whether you're a vast school or part of a multi-academy trust, you are looked upon by the community as someone who knows what they're doing. And that's quite a responsibility at a time of national crisis. You have to look like you know what you're doing, even when you don't. And people come to you with all kinds of worries and problems. And you yourself, of course, will be having the same worries. We were all told to expect the untimely death of some of our loved ones. That's a terrible thing to hear a Prime Minister of the day talking about. And yet, pretty much the next day, our school leaders had to, were opening up their schools for the most vulnerable children and carrying on. And I think that's remarkable. What's been achieved is remarkable by those colleagues. And frankly, they're exhausted. But as I was listening into the previous session and listening to Becky talking about her school and how much good heart there is because people feel they've made a difference. People do know they've made a difference in the last year and a bit. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's quite instructive, isn't it, that there has been an outpouring of love and admiration for people working in the health services. And I think perhaps it's, certainly anecdotally from a teacher I know, and from having spoken with you, there's a sense that that pupils and possibly parents have become much more tuned into the fact that teachers have lives as well, and complications outside of work. I wonder whether there's been a lack of respect for teachers in politics and in the media. I mean, you've been kind of lambasted and almost accused of backsliding, really.
I mean, 'twas ever thus. I think the problem with being a teacher is that everybody's been to school, right? So you've only got to get in the back of a taxi, and the taxi driver knows how to run the education system better than people who've been in it all their career. So I do think, however, that there has been a shift in mood. I think parents who've witnessed the relationship that teachers have with their students and seeing that actually that there's something quite magical that happens when a teacher really connects with their youngsters, albeit digitally. They've still been able to hold that presence, and you know, the youngsters want to impress their teachers. Parents often want to impress their teachers as well. So there's something there that's been much more visible. It's been like having, quite terrifyingly, it's been like having not only your children in the classroom, but all their parents as well, in the back of the room watching what you're doing. Teachers have been put on their mettle, they really have. But they've also responded, I think, in a very agile manner. And certainly some schools were able to do that straight away because they had the resources, frankly. You know, I'd visited an independent school, a very well-known independent school, just prior to the pandemic. And there I was introduced to someone who was, all of the students had Surface books, you know, they'd all got these devices, all the teachers had these devices, they'd got shared lesson planning, they got shared assessments, all prior to the pandemic. But what they were saying to me at that time was, some of the departments have really taken this on, other departments are pretty much ignoring that it's there. You know, but once the pandemic struck, they were prime position, weren't they, to be able to carry this off. Whereas we've got other schools with youngsters with one mobile phone between the whole family, and a lack of connectivity as well, and a lack of places to study.
Very confronting, hasn't it? That straightforward understanding. Really? Not everyone's got a spare bedroom, and not everyone's got a kitchen table, let alone a laptop. Just before I bring both Michael and Damian into the conversation, I just want to go to Esther, if we could summon her from the chat, because I think Esther is a parent who's used some of the Oak Academy resources. I'd love to hear what you've been teaching from it and what you made of it.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello. I should caveat that in that I do work in education.
Right.
So
yeah,
but I am a parent to an 8 and a 5-year-old as well.
And so yes, so what did you get from Oak Academy?
Well, it's I suppose, like, the main thing is that it's easily accessible. Like, the website is really well laid out, so you can find the thing that's relevant for your child really easily. And then and what was good, it was just the teacher, I can't remember his name now, Mr. someone, he was just really engaging. Mr. someone, sorry, that's very rude. He was very engaging, and almost as if he was actually in the room with us as the real teacher. And I think my son just really engaged with that, and we did it kind of every day and went through the whole sequence of lessons, and it didn't feel, it just felt like it was put together by a professional rather than just someone who's just having a go. And speaking as professional, that came across. So yeah.
Well, we can all aspire to that. Michael, thank you so much for that, Esther. I really appreciate it. Michael, I wonder if I could bring you in again. As I said, I mean, we adorn you with the title of Chancellor of Regent's University, but I know that, you know, I suppose variously, for people who don't know, you've worked in, well, you started in the classroom, and I think you've certainly had experience of philanthropy, business, politics, tech, equality, broadcasting. Is there anything I've missed? I wonder what you think is a good starting point for what you felt actually worked that surprised you from this year. And I think as we start to talk about you know, the role of technology here, whether you feel there's any sort of downside as well to the always on sort of culture that we live in now.
Well, thanks very much. And can I start by really boosting up Matthew? I mean, we've spoken before in the prep session, but I mean, what he's done, how he's done it, and the way he does it, and the engagement it's produced is. Somebody said in the chat that his OBE should be upgraded to a knighthood. So, you know, I'm very happy to co-sign the letter. Whoever wants to send it along. Yeah, let's get that done. Let's get it done. You know, one of the things you didn't mention, David, but it's okay, is that I'm I'm a governor of a school in Kenya, which is a Vodafone supported school. So Vodafone created Safaricom in Kenya, which is the biggest company in Kenya, and that created M-Pesa, which is a mobile mechanism for transferring money. And all the profits from the M-Pesa system, which literally are in the many hundreds of millions of dollar equivalents, have to go into education. So there's an academy for 900 of Kenya's very, 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 very poorest of all children from every one of the 43 regions of the country. And because it's Vodafone, Safaricom, every single child is equipped with an iPad, which is what I'm talking to you on now from a room in the House of Lords. But every one of our children in Kenya has an iPad. Every one of them has 4G connectivity. And when we had to close the academy down and all 900 children had to go back to their rural villages, we could continue to teach them on the 4G highly connected network in Kenya. And what I found very challenging was that we couldn't do that in the UK. There was this whole area of battling about physical resources, so many children not having a computer, a laptop, let alone an iPad, let alone something, a tablet of some kind, and connectivity was not ideal. Because obviously what happened in the last year is that we had to see something of a reality. As a trained, quotes, professional teacher who's taught in the classroom, despite all the other educational things that I do, is that we had to allow parents and uncles and aunts and cousins and friends and family and all the rest of it, we had to allow them to become the engagers, encouragers, motivators, teachers of our children. Mm. And so we went from the formal structures of education, and that's why what Matthew has done is so important, the formal structures of education and teaching and schools and the profession, into the highly informal, and recognizing, as has always been the case, that everybody is a teacher. Right. Everybody is a teacher, because every parent, every mother, and hopefully father around teaches their child the tone of their voice and the first words.
I think you're getting to something really quickly very interesting here, aren't you, about, we can talk about the physical changes that have been imposed on classrooms, but it's the attitudinal stuff that might be that endures.
Well, it's not just it isn't just the attitudinal stuff that was being picked up during the course of the last year from home, community circumstances, from the internet, from the phone. It literally was curriculum as well that was being engaged with or not engaged with in the home. And all of a sudden, thank goodness for BBC Bite Size, thank goodness for different platforms which allowed access for educational content, thank goodness for what Matthew and his colleagues have done. But we also witnessed in the course of the last year, this is just taking the sort of slightly negative downside, we saw the phenomenal rise of social media disinformation. And we witnessed that in multiple examples around the pandemic, let alone around, as we saw the Ofsted report very recently, into the sexualized pressures that so many children face at school. And we've begun to see that actually probably one of the greatest educators sits in the hand and the pocket of the children who are either going to school or having to be learning at home. And the profession hasn't fully engaged with as yet, the potency of the online reality that every single child is living with every single day, every single second, every single day. What its content is, what its motivational drivers are, and what incredible power sits in this. I'm co-chairman of the...
And I think you're, am I right in thinking you've recently begun a parliamentary inquiry into...
We have. Social media, yes. It's the all-party parliamentary group on media literacy. And, because we realized based on an independent report that despite the fact that the government said that teachers need to be teaching children to be confident about media awareness, only 43% of schools were able to accord the fact that they'd included anything about media awareness in their curriculum, in their classrooms, in their content. And yet it's just everywhere. It is the reality of children's experiences constantly, what they're witnessing, what they're seeing, what they're taking, what they're feeling, what they're expressing. So I think one of the positive learnings out of last year, one of the many positive learnings is, that education content, education experiences, education motivation come from many sources, and parents can feel empowered to be educators, and family can feel empowered to be educators, and children can feel that they can take on the reality of education through technology and learn. That's the upside of it all. And the downside challenge is that we haven't prepared children for the complexity of what this kit in their hands or in their pockets does to them, what it shows them, what it reveals to them, what it challenges them to take part in, what it entices them to follow, what it says about the nature of our society, about leadership, and whether or not it teaches them about fundamentals that profoundly matter. I mean, so let me just give you an example. We've just hosted the G7. The Prime Minister hosted the G7 in Cornwall this last weekend successfully. And, I listened to the cynical commentary on BBC Radio 4 about what really came out of that summit. What was the point of having those people together? What did they really achieve? Kind of wishy-washy comments about climate change and wishy-washy this about trade. And so, forgetting the fact that the most important thing they did was spend time together. Spend time listening. The tendency is to so go after just results without realizing that one of the things that is so important is experiences.
Absolutely take your point. I'm just I can't quite let past what they didn't do, which was fail to do a deal for vaccinations around the world. But
I totally agree. As Vice President of UNICEF, I totally agree.
Yes, well, good. Now, Damian, I might just bring you in at this point. I'd love to next, if my colleague Tom's on the tech side of this, it would be lovely to talk to Elizabeth, who had made some great points in the chat about digital inequality and her own experience. But Damian, just what's on your mind? What's your starting point when you look back at the year we've been through and the opportunities that lie ahead potentially?
Yeah. So thanks, David, and very much enjoyed the conversation so far. I mean, I think the first thing for me is, in a sense, the way this question is posed around what we need to keep from the last 12 months is quite challenging, because a lot of the national narrative is about all of the difficulties that we've now inherited that we're trying to fix. And but I think the panelists, I think so far have illustrated, some of the good things that have come out, as well as some of the challenges. And I think for me, why this is a really important conversation, first of all, is I notice in how we talk about the pandemic, there seem to be two national conversations going on in parallel, and I'm not entirely sure how connected they are. So what one says, one talks about post-COVID and post-pandemic, and if we can just get through the next 4 weeks, then we can go back to our lives as they were before. But there is another narrative that says, what we need to think about, across the public and private sphere is how we live with COVID and future pandemics. So I think one of the critical things for me is recognizing that we might find that having to learn and teach in different ways is going to become more of a fixture. I think makes this conversation really important. I mean, in terms of other things on my mind, I might sort of try to pick up on and stitch together a few points that have already been made. So Lord Hastings made the point about the importance of infrastructure, and particularly sort of broadband infrastructure and access, as a real challenge around equalising, technology access. There was a lot of discussion during the pandemic itself on devices. The DfE managed to get 1.3 million devices out, and we can debate whether that was insufficient, sufficient, was it quick enough, was it not? But I think it was a pretty phenomenal logistical achievement. But I think we still have we have a more enduring problem that we need to fix. The Ofcom data, I believe, that suggests that if you live in a rural area, you will have 20% less kind of online broadband capacity than if you live in an urban area. And we know that actually, when we start to look at things like cold spots, evidence around the attainment gap, that is also correlated with families in rural areas. So I think there's quite around the technology access piece, there's quite a strong urban-rural split that I think we need to be thinking about. So that would be observation number one. Second piece is thinking about how we give children the confidence to engage with social media in the online environment safely, which again Michael spoke about a bit. One of the things that we do across a number of local authority areas is provide assisted monitoring services for schools around online safety and safeguarding. And so we've been seeing a lot of the data around that over the last 12 months. And what we observed was there's been something like a 30% uptick in what we would describe as kind of low risk online activity, which might be visiting an inappropriate website, these sorts of things. But I think sort of more worryingly, significant increase in what we'd see as sort of high risk behaviour. So something like 40% of that is about children engaging with material online that's sort of sexually inappropriate in some way. 25% is around sort of suicide, self-harm, sort of mental wellness type activity. And I guess in addition to the education piece around social media, I think there is something that we need to be thinking about around, what are the techniques and the mechanisms that we want to use to create safer online environments for children if technology and online learning are sort of here to stay, and actually where does responsibility for that sit? Most of the devices the DFE delivered into schools were fitted with filtering. I have a 14-year-old daughter, and she can get around a set of internet filters if she wants to, quicker than I can, and I suspect that other people, on the panel, may feel similarly. And I guess final point, and I want to sort of link back here to something that Alison was talking about earlier, which was around just how hard the profession have worked over the last 12 months. Not always getting the feedback and the credit that they deserve, and the sense that the profession are exhausted. And are we surprised, given that we asked more or less overnight, teachers to learn to operate and deliver learning and development in a completely different way to the way that they would have been trained to do historically. So thinking about the future investment that we make in teacher development through things like the Early Careers Framework, National Professional Qualifications, what are the things that we need to be doing differently in professional development design, better to support the profession to be able to engage with this model of learning, more easily.
Yeah, I think. Well, thank you very much for that, Damian, and let's bring Elizabeth in if we could, because I think your experience of the digital gap, I suppose, is really quite instructive.
Oh, hi there. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what else you wanted me to add. So I was in education with an excellent IT team, and shortly before the March lockdown, we had about 45 minutes training on Google Meet and Google Hangouts. And we were sort of then thrown into the fire days after lockdown. And the teachers worked around the lessons appropriately as much as they could. But for my own children during that time, there was no initiative taken. And I don't blame the teachers here. I think teachers in general have taken a lot of flack from actually decisions made by head teachers and a sort of ethos that's trickled down. But my own schools didn't do any audit. They didn't ask us whether we have a laptop. They didn't ask us about phones. And my older daughter is a very able pupil. She's in top sets. She's always been incredibly diligent. I've never had to ask her to do homework since year 2. And she started to struggle and flag. And it was really hard to keep her going, especially as I was working my hours. And then I've also got a primary age child who was also just left, really. We had a once a week call to say, how are we? It's like, well, I'm struggling. But having said that, it did work out very well for my youngest daughter, because as I explained in the chat, she does have undiagnosed SEN. And I was able to, it really forced me to key into her curriculum and try and understand what she's supposed to learn at that age. And we really managed to bring on her reading during that time. But my main point of coming today was that with my experience with my youngest daughter, I've seen a massive gap in apparently teachers don't get any SEND training. So it's a bit like the blind fighting the blind. And now I've spoken to loads of SENCO, loads of parents with children who have struggled like my daughter. And apparently it is a big gap. And if teachers could just have more training on what to spot, we can help the wheels move sooner to then get the appropriate help in place.
I wonder, thank you so much for all of that and for just nudging us in that direction, because I think it's really interesting. Alison, I wonder if just to sort of ask you about that. I suppose one of the things of digital learning has been that, you know, potentially children can learn at their own pace. But I wonder, is there a gap there? How, you know, have children been suffering unduly and we're only spotting it because of what we've been through?
So there's a range of things I want to say, one of which is that I was in a conversation only yesterday with the department where they're talking about developing a specialist route for classroom teachers who can study further about understanding special educational needs. So that's something that is really important, because currently in the year-long teacher training that teachers experience, they don't have a great deal of time, you're quite right, to really try and understand the full range of additional needs that youngsters may have in their classrooms. They experience that on the ground in the schools where they're training, and of course they work with special needs coordinators in their schools to make sure that they are adapting their teaching to quality first teaching for all children. But in the lockdown, what's really interesting, I was speaking to the chair of the National Autistic Society. She said that many of their children had actually, ironically, flourished more by being at home where no one was disrupting their routine. No one was saying, right, now you've got to transition from home to school or vice versa. They were actually feeling very safe in that environment. And that's something that's quite interesting to me, you know, that we kind of assume that everybody needs to be forced to do the same things. And actually we're individuals, aren't we? So there's something that I think perhaps we can learn from that. But also I just wanted to reinforce the fact that teachers more than ever want to be as up-to-date as they can be with the latest research and knowledge about how to teach most effectively. And when you've got someone in your class with an additional need, if you're a teacher who really cares, and the vast majority of teachers really do, they try their utmost to meet those needs. But sometimes, you know, there will be parents who would say, well, it's not good enough, and there's more that we can do. And absolutely the profession wants to do that.
I'm going to come back to you if I could. I know when we talked in advance of this conversation, you took me magnificently to task and also took me by surprise. Firstly, I will say it's not an original complaint, but you did say that we'd got the wrong question. So I'd like to hear from you on why it is you think that the question is wrong. But then secondly, I would have naturally and naively assumed that you would be leading the charge towards the future and toward doing things differently. And I was surprised to see that's not quite where you stand.
Oh, no. So I'm absolutely.
Alison, sorry, I meant that to be for Matt, if that's.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I do beg your pardon. Have we unmuted Matt?
Sorry, I just needed the person with the power to unmute me. We've not been bestowed with that particular power in the school, which is probably wise of you. So before the pandemic hit, and indeed, like throughout my career to date, I found myself in lots of conversations where the topic or question is similar to this one, which is the world is changing quicker than it's ever changed before. Schools largely look the same as they did during Victorian times. You can just Google things. We've all got smartphones. Everything needs to be future facing, and let's sort of tear down everything that we've built so far and start again. And it always sounds like a new conversation, and it never is a new conversation. You can find this question in the history books going back decades. I mean, I think it's reasonably common in most professions that despite being politically progressive, when it comes to your own area of expertise, you suddenly become quite conservative, and maybe I'm at risk of being accused of that. But I'm just not sure the evidence stacks up for the majority of those claims that are made about the education system. We know a lot about what makes effective teaching and learning. I don't think the purpose of education is to prepare people for jobs that don't exist yet. In fact, I don't even think it's to prepare people for jobs. I think we have a very diminished view of education, and my pushback to the CBI and others is always training people to work wherever you need them to work is your responsibility. My responsibility is to make them excited individuals who have access to the best of what has been thought and said and danced and sung and painted, not because it's useful for the future, but just because it's a wonderful part of human civilization that we get to pass on. A part of those conversations tends to lean towards technology being the answer to this jobs that don't exist yet question. And again, I'm not entirely sure the evidence stacks up there either. If I was going to be the education secretary and spend a load of money overnight, I would be placing it into proving the expertise of teachers, because that's the thing that the evidence shows us is what makes the biggest difference, particularly for pupils from low-income families. The bit, however, that I have changed my mind on, from an edtech skeptic into a person running an edtech organization, then through a pandemic, is that I think the question has gone beyond what is most likely to improve outcomes and close gaps, and into a conversation that I think is quite uncomfortable for the citizens of the United Kingdom to have, which is one about access. And if you have any conversations internationally, particularly in countries in sub-Saharan Africa, most of your time and energy and effort is going to be about how do you improve access to education. Decade ago, particularly primary education, currently particularly education for girls, increasingly secondary education. And that's very normal, and it's a very routine part of the discussion. And we are not used to a conversation about access to education in the UK. And I think what the pandemic has shown us is that if you do not have a device, and that device is not connected to data, and as I said in the chat, not all devices are equal. Ideally, you have a laptop device and that device is not connected to the internet. I'm not sure we can credibly say that we have equal access coming the other side of this pandemic. And we certainly couldn't say we had access during the pandemic. Oak National Academy is 0 rated, so we work with the telecommunications companies to make sure that there are no data charges associated. We did all we could to encourage and jump up and down about people getting devices. So that, I think, is a really important conversation and question we need to have. It breaches on all kinds of interesting topics like net neutrality. How do you 0 rate education websites? Which websites do you 0 rate? Like, that is a big, old, knotty question and debate to have. But I think in the main, schools do an incredible job, and I want them to continue doing the majority of what they're doing. Yes, of course, there are lessons that we've learned during the pandemic, not least my cover lesson example, and there is a whole load beyond, and we should learn those lessons and do them. I don't think technology is the silver bullet that's going to close all of the gaps and make everything wonderful, but do I think having a device and connectivity is a fundamental issue about access? Yes, now I do, and I didn't think that a year ago.
That's really interesting, and I think it gets us to a slightly wider conversation about what, how do you judge, how do you measure success and progress in education? I suppose, you know, we've touched upon people becoming more acutely aware of mental health issues during the pandemic, and we've also looked at, those children who might have flourished at home by learning at their own pace or without distractions. But it starts to get you into a conversation about attainment versus all of the other well-being issues. And I wonder, just to sort of, in the limited time we have left, whether, Michael, you could quickly give me a minute on your thoughts on that, and then perhaps Damian, you too, on mental health.
Well, you know, I suppose if we were to flag one of the big mental health pressure realities that happened in the middle of last year, it was the killing, the slaughter of George Floyd, and the implications that spilt out from that, not just in the United States, here across the world. What that flagged, in addition, and we're seeing this happening with university after university, and also with institutions like the Bank of England literally this week, which is people really looking at the complexity of history through a different lens, and are looking at some of the celebrated leaders that we've taken great aplomb to and asking, were they complicit in? Now, this is education happening, history happening for us again in a very vivid way, which is looking at the world through a global lens, back to what was, forward to what we'd want to be better. I'm not one of those who believes in taking statues down and rewriting history as though it didn't happen. Let's just explain history an awful lot better, but let's ensure that the generations of children now and into the future understand the complexity of those world interconnected events. In the same way, you know, I'd love every child in all of our schools, in all of our homes, to know where Wuhan is. Whether or not the virus came from Wuhan is yet unsettled exactly, but they ought to know where it is. But they also ought to know, why is Wuhan significant? Having never heard of it before, realizing it's a city of somewhere between 15 and 20 million people. There are over 120 cities in China with populations greater than 15 million. And we have one city in the UK with a population less than 10 million. Understanding the complexity and the intrigue of the way our world is now, I think that is something that has to have come out of the last year, that we gift into the future, but into the present, because exactly as Matthew said, education isn't just about learning things for outcomes. It is about learning so that we can engage, so that we can dialogue.
And I think just to develop that a little, you don't have to be of school age to have that apply to you. I think you know, there's a lot of willful ignorance in play, I think, at large in society. Thank you for that. And Damian, I'm going to just quickly come to you, and I wonder how deeply you've thought about the mental health implications of the work you do, and where tech in the classroom can have a role.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I'd probably draw a distinction between you know, broader sort of mental and emotional wellness, and, you know, more specific diagnosable sort of mental health type conditions. And I think we need to think about those things differently. And I say that because I think sometimes they tend to get conflated in debates about this this kind of stuff. I guess my reflection on this is, it's less about role of technology. I think it's more about recognizing that you know, schools operate within a nexus of organisations, and actually where we observe the most critical problems, particularly when we're talking about mental health, it's less about you know, the initial triaging and the support that children get access to in schools, because, you know, often that, you know, that's pretty reasonable. It is more about the bottleneck that is created when schools attempt to engage with child and adolescent mental health services, and the extent that those are struggling. So my guess is, although there are others on this panel that would know more about this than me, that if you asked you know, schools to articulate, you know, single biggest area of concern around mental health, it would be around getting better access more quickly to child and adolescent mental health services, which as we know, have been underinvested in.
That's a funding issue.
For many years.
Absolutely. I think we've got fully 60 seconds to go. I'm going to do a quick fire round, starting with you, Alison. What are you keeping from the past 15 months? Have we lost Alison, sound-wise?
Sorry, there we are. Is that better?
Probably our fault. We're going to go Alison, Matt, and then we'll go Damian, Michael, and then, yeah, come on, quick fire. What are you keeping?
So we realise what happens when people say, I want the world to stop, can I get off? The world stopped, didn't it? And I think it made us realise what's really important, and we need to translate that into education, valuing the things that really matter to us, and taking that forward as we go beyond the pandemic, hopefully.
Thank you. And Matt? What are you keeping?
I think schools have taken even more steps to become the central focus point of the communities in which they operate. They have built relationships with parents, other organisations. They have built capacities and capabilities that they didn't have before the pandemic, and they should hang on to those. They're incredibly powerful and incredibly useful in a whole range of different circumstances.
Excellent. Damian?
I think it would be, we have had the opportunity to engage in a essentially unplanned large-scale experiment in introducing completely different models of learning and teaching, into the system. And I think using the insight from that to think differently about system design going forward, whether that's about curriculum structure, mental health, whatever it is.
Yeah, and go on. Last word to you, Michael. What are you keeping?
Wonderful people like Captain Tom and Marcus Rashford. I mean, we've discovered that there are heroes, men and women, who go out and do extraordinary things, and these motivate and excite and entice future generations and today's young. And we need to see so much more of that. The heroes from those who push the trolleys for people desperate to get into hospital, right the way through to the hard workers in the classroom and the hospitals, through to those who delivered endless packages to us. This is, we've discovered about heroism, and I love that fact.
That's a very vivid way of reinforcing your point. I think that education is everywhere, not just in the classroom. And I think what I've taken from this as well is that technology has certainly been a great benefit in many ways to take the load off teachers and to help pupils. In many cases, it's been extremely confronting to see that the inequalities in education that are, we haven't even talked about really the difference between public schools and state schools, but it's always been there. We've always known it was there, and it's been underlined in different ways in the last 15 months. But I think both, Alison and Matt in different ways saying the same thing, that schools have been celebrated, I think, in the last 15 months for their role at the heart of communities. And that seems to me like just an awakening, a realization, and something we can hang on to without actually spending any money. We just have to be more appreciative of one another and connect, as you rightly said, Alison. Well, look, we've gone 2 minutes over. I do apologise for that. Thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for not deviating towards Denmark and Belgium, I think it is at the moment. But it's been a great session. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you. There's another one coming along in a minute, and it's a guy who really does know everything, Chris Cook. Right, see you guys. Thanks again.